David Ghantt was just an ordinary poor man. But every day he played with millions of dollars for 16 hours. Yet his own pockets were always empty. In fact, David was a supervisor for Loomis Fargo, a famous security firm that transported millions of dollars between banks. All day he guarded this money, but his own salary was hardly $8 per hour. But how long could he strangle his dreams and cover himself with a heavy blanket of honesty? One day, fed up with this honest life, David decided to do something wrong. This is the interesting story of the 1997 Loomis Fargo Bank heist, a story that forced the FBI to launch an international manhunt. And this very story became the foundation for the 2016 Hollywood film Masterminds. Surprisingly, David himself even worked on the movie about his own crime. But unfortunately, he wasn't paid a single penny for it. Welcome back once again, Tough Decades Videos. David Ghantt was a retired Gulf War veteran. He had once protected his country, but now he was a supervisor at Loomis Fargo, an armored car company. In other words, money in his hands, empty pockets, and the heavy burden of family responsibilities on his shoulders. He worked 75 to 80 hours a week, yet earned only $5.50 per hour. David Ghantt was tired of his routine, loneliness, and the hopelessness of not doing something big in life were eating him up inside. These were the circumstances that filled David's heart with a strange restlessness and eventually gave birth to wrong thoughts. And once those thoughts of dishonesty entered his heart, fate placed someone in front of him who would open the path. That person's name was Kelley Campbell. Kelley also worked at Loomis Fargo. She was bold, sharp, and mysterious. During work, she became friends with David, and often they met after office hours too. Their friendship grew so deep that even when Kelley left her job, she and David continued meeting. One day, Kelley introduced David to her friend Steve Chambers. Steve was a small-time criminal, always dreaming of making big money fast. When Steve learned that David was a Loomis Fargo supervisor in charge of armored vehicles, a wicked idea sparked in his mind, the idea of robbery. But to make it successful, he needed David to join them. That's when Steve and Kelley began convincing David, whose intentions were already slipping, found Steve's idea like a push to a crumbling wall. At first, David was very scared. He had never done anything illegal before. But Steve's attitude and promises slowly pulled him in. Steve painted dreams of a rich and luxurious life. David's frustration, Kelley's support, and Steve's greed all combined to drag him to a point of no return. And that's where the planning for the master plan began. Now the problem was, Steve was just a small-time crook. Kelley had no real experience, and David, well, he was the weakest link. So their plan turned out to be something that would make a professional thief laugh. The plan was simple. On October 4th, 1997, after his duty ended, David would stay inside the vault, switch off the security cameras, steal the tape, and then load the company's van with cash before escaping after the heist. David was supposed to take only $50,000 with him to Mexico, since at that time, that was the maximum amount allowed to cross the U.S. border legally. The rest of the money would remain with Steve. Later, once things cooled down, David would return, and they'd split the money equally, but there was a huge flaw. Why would Steve, who had all the cash, later share it with David, who risked everything, for just $50,000? But blinded by greed, David never thought of that, and finally the night arrived. On October 4th, 1997, around 6 p.m., David sent his trainee staff home early. Now he was alone, with the vault under his control. Nervous and trembling, David entered the vault. He disabled 2 cameras and stole their tapes. But he forgot about the 3rd camera hidden in a corner. That camera silently recorded everything. For the next few hours, Unaware of this, David began stuffing cash into the van. But this wasn't the usual cash counting and transporting. It was emptying the entire vault. All alone, in one go dot, most of the cash was in $20 bills. An estimated 800,000 notes, over 8,000 bundles. It took hours to load them into the van. After nearly 2 hours, David had packed $17.3 million into the vehicle, unaware that he had just pulled off the second largest cash robbery in U.S. history. Overjoyed, David even danced in the vault. And yes, that too was captured by the third camera. The next morning, when Loomis Fargo employees arrived, they found the vault locked and the keys missing. Police were immediately called, and because David was the only employee absent, suspicion fell on him right away. When the security footage was reviewed, the suspicion turned into certainty. And David's little dance only added insult to injury. The footage also revealed that David kept messaging someone on his pager during the heist, proving he wasn't working alone. Within 2 days, the FBI found the cash van abandoned in the woods. Inside was about $3 million in cash money David couldn't carry due to weight and lack of time. The stolen tapes were also inside. That meant David and his partner still had around $14 million. Most of it in unmarked $20 bills, impossible to trace if spent. Meanwhile, David had already flown to Mexico with his $50,000. Living in a luxury beach resort, the FBI launched a massive campaign, publishing ads in newspapers and offering a $500,000 reward for information. Citizens were urged to report anyone who suddenly seemed to have a lot of money. Calls flooded in. At first, most were just prank or hopeful tips. But one call changed everything. A man reported that his neighbor suddenly had a suspicious amount of money. That neighbor was none other than Steve Chambers. The FBI quietly began surveillance. They discovered Steve couldn't resist flaunting his wealth. Along with his wife Michelle, he had bought a big fancy house, a new BMW, and was spending freely on luxury. When investigators checked his bank records, they found that after October 4th, Steve had deposited large sums of money, mostly in $20 bills. One bank teller even revealed that Michelle had asked how much cash could be deposited without triggering federal reports. By now, the FBI was sure Steve and Michelle were part of the heist, but they stayed silent, wanting to uncover all the accomplices, especially David. Within 10 days, everything was unraveling. The FBI tapped Steve's phone. One shocking call between Steve and a man named Mike McKinney revealed something chilling they were planning to have David killed in Mexico. The flaw in their plan had now surfaced. Steve wanted all the money for himself. The FBI arrested Mike McKinney, who confessed everything. He revealed David's location in Mexico and explained how the stolen cash had first been taken to the parking lot of Reynolds printing press where Steve worked. Instead of hiding the transfer, they carelessly moved the money right next to Steve's office. Pressed for time and overwhelmed with so much cash, they abandoned $3 million in the van and dumped it in the woods. This reckless planning made it easy for the FBI to connect the dots. By then, within 10 days, the FBI already had strong leads. But they waited nearly 5 months, collecting solid evidence. Finally, on March 1st, 1998, David Ghantt was arrested in Mexico. The next day, Steve Chambers, his wife Michelle, and Kelley Campbell were arrested in Charlotte, North Carolina. The FBI recovered nearly 88% of the stolen money. The rest had been blown on luxuries by Steve. Steve Chambers was sentenced to 11 years in prison. David Ghantt received 7 years and was also held responsible for the missing $3 million, even though he never spent it. In 2016, Hollywood turned this story into the movie Masterminds. David worked as a consultant but wasn't paid. By law, any money owed to him would go directly toward paying off his debts. At that time, David was working construction jobs. He once said, "Even if I worked my whole life, I'd never be able to repay that debt." Today, David Ghantt lives in Jacksonville, Florida, with his wife and kids, working as a construction worker to get by. He maintains a presence on social media, often sharing his story as a warning for others to learn from his mistakes.